Patrick Salili Adolwa is not a stranger to this studio. As a matter of fact, I think at this point, tumfungulie ofisi tu mahali hapa kando, so that we can just be doing this consultation, at will. All right. So here we go. Patrick, good morning and welcome to Radio Generation.
Good morning. I don't want to leave here.
Yeah.
I want to come once in a while.
I mean, you can have an office. You don't have to use it all the time, but it can be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
How so generous of you. Thank you.
Ona nakupatia ofisi na hata huku si kwangu.
I'm amazed at your generosity.
With other people's assets.
I know.
But welcome nonetheless.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about boarding schools. And what the big question about boarding schools is all about. I've actually heard of this being mentioned before, right? Someone has actually spoken about it before. Like, should we get rid of boarding schools? Should we probably, I don't know, not repurpose them, but really, should we change the way we admit students into boarding schools because of, first of all, where they come from, because of their ethnicity, and so on and so forth? So maybe we can start from there. Do we really need boarding schools?
Well, it's a very emotive question. I tested it on a few people before I came here yesterday. I asked some of my colleagues what they thought.
Yes.
And I knew that I was navigating a minefield from the very word go. And that for me is part of the problem, because we've been programmed to think that there can be no school if it isn't a boarding school.
Yes.
But I think we miss the point completely, because what we should preoccupy ourselves is with how to have a good school, fit for purpose school, cost effectively. And then the question that begs is, how did we get to this place with boarding schools? And one then inevitably goes back to the colonial era, when perhaps for good reasons we needed boarding schools, and they served a purpose. Schools were scarce, students lived far, so they had to find some sort of accommodation. Kids used to walk long distances to go to school. People were poor, and so the education as a resource and the facilities were far in between, and so something had to be done to make sure that people go to school, and boarding schools made a lot of sense. So that's the route for me. But I still maintain that what we should be looking to is to provide good education within the villages, within the communities, because education is not something you walk a long distance to find. It must be done within a community. And that is why when we design communities, there are certain basic things around which we design those communities. It's a community hall, it's a school, it's a chapel, and that is a core function of a community. So it's not just the education that we get through pedagogical processes, but that which also comes from within the community, endogenically, organically. And so we miss that. Okay? So for me, yes, boarding schools were not always bad.
Yeah.
They had their time. But today, there are many reasons why they are unsustainable.
Okay.
And without being emotional, we can discuss some of the reasons why.
For example, let me just point out a few things that have been happening in our boarding schools. We have experienced riots, student unrest. We have experienced fires. We have also, like in the last week, I think 2 students have died in school. One of them is a boarder for sure, because I remember the student was taken to hospital, and then the parents were called in only for them to be told that the child had died on arrival. Now, it's a young girl. I'm just forgetting from which part of the country she was coming from, but the point is she was taken to hospital and then pronounced dead on arrival. And then after post-mortem was undertaken on the body, they found out that she had pneumonia. Actually, now the post-mortem was done yesterday, and that's when the family was given this particular report that the child had pneumonia. And I was asking myself, pneumonia is not a disease that will kill you, that will infect you today and then kill you today. There's a progression as to how your body will finally given to this pneumonia. And my immediate question was, didn't the teachers notice that this child was suffering, probably having breathing difficulties? Did they assume it was just a common cold? Then there's the issue of the medical practitioners within the school, whether it's a school nurse or any other person who is a medic. Were they not able to identify this particular difficulty? So it just made me think, and I was asking myself, what if if someone had intervened early enough, this child would still be alive? So again, I asked the question, the boarding schools, how are they set up? Because I've been to our boarding school before in my high school, but I never experienced these problems that we are currently seeing right now.
You barely survived. You barely survived by a whisker.
Yeah.
You described something that we must go to the root cause of. So when you describe all the things that you've described, you were not talking about education.
Yes.
Nothing you have said about
has got to do with education.
The event that took place, culminating into the death of this kid. None of that, nothing about it has anything to do with education.
True.
Do you realize that?
Yes, I do.
You've spoken about inadequacy of facilities, safety, and roles and functions for which people in education are really equipped. You cannot have expected them to be nurses, to be hostel managers, to know what to do with pneumonia and so on and so forth. The school is not fitted out to deal with that kind of situation.
Yes.
And that is perhaps one of the most important illustrations of why we are not ready for boarding schools. Because, there's no way a boarding school can respond to the situation which you speak to.
Yeah.
It's not equipped. It doesn't have a hospital. Even if you look at what they call a sanatorium or a sick bay, it's just a space in a dormitory. And the school nurse, one school nurse to 1,000 students, I think it's a big mismatch. So, in fact, from a safety and infrastructure point of view, the schools are ill-equipped to deal with boarding. And if we must build boarding schools, then we must build them to include facilities that can take care of the situation that you have spoken to, and that we do not even begin to think of.
Why? Why don't you even begin to think of those?
The question is yours, just as it is mine, because
that is precisely the point.
The thing is, when we build those schools, we just say we want people to go to boarding schools, but we do not.
Who are the people who think about this? This is really where I'm going to this. Are the people who think about these things equipped to actually adequately give thought to this process in a way that will make that so-called institution we refer to as a boarding school?
No, of course they're not. They're not, but they make decisions without consulting other people many times.
People who actually have the knowledge and the ability to advise them correctly.
Yes, but when people go out to make policies for education, do they invite other professionals? No, they don't.
Who are not in the education sector?
Yes, they do not invite them.
But that begs the question, who exactly is not in the education sector?
Everybody should be. Everybody should be.
Yes.
I know that one time I went to Great Rift for something else, for a different meeting on devolution. And there were people, experts there, from the Ministry of Education looking at matters education policy. And one of them, the late Professor Godia, was a friend of mine. And I asked him, Professor, what are you doing here? And he said, we're having a policy dialogue in education. And I know I wasn't very good to him. I said, but you people are always sitting by yourselves. Yeah. So nothing ever changes because you never get the perspective of other people, how the education setup should be, reformed. That is a problem. And again, even when university people go down to do their syllabuses, they never take people from industry. So they go and speak to themselves. So every time professionals from different sectors go out there to speak about policy reforms, they never think about getting the perspective that is completely out of their purview at the moment.
Yeah, because in an ideal situation, then, if we are coming up with a boarding school or boarding school framework, then we should consider certain things such as the health of the students, health of the teachers, fire hazards, riots, and other situations that could come in. As far as the education of the children is concerned, sports. I hardly see these people, like you've said, because I've actually been to these particular kinds of gatherings, and I actually do not see any medical practitioners given their input as far as how these places should be set up.
Well, I think now that we are speaking about it, people might begin to see why we are worried about the current setup of boarding schools. And particularly when you look at the numbers, I know there are some national schools and some extra county schools with up to 2,000 students. And if you look at a school with 2,000 students, then it must have 200 teachers, then it must have a workforce of about 100 people and so on and so forth. So it's a whole village in itself. It's a huge ecosystem. But when you begin to think about the implications for management, is the principal of a school equipped to run that institution? He is not. Does he know that he needs a totally different administrative setup to be able to run two concurrent things at the same time? One is education, and the other has absolutely nothing to do with education per se. So, in fact, if you're going to have some of those boarding schools, then we must begin to think that you may need to have an administrative setup that has both people from education and people who have nothing to do with education are just administrators. You need people who are hostel managers. You need people who are psychologists and so on and so forth. To the extent that perhaps even when people think, well, we don't have outlets for psychologists, I mean, all these schools need one or two psychologists.
I believe during my time we had what was called, the person was called a peer counselor.
Yes, but he was just one of the teachers, okay?
Yes.
Because they had done a unit in psychology, you know.
Also, they were
saying when you study education, you will do several units of psychology.
Yes.
And you are right.
Yes.
It is not as though that is your purview to be a guidance counselor, as they used to call them in an earlier time. You are a teacher like every other teacher.
Correct.
But then you're given this particular docket.
Yes.
I have, however, seen progressive schools who have employed a nurse.
Very good.
Who has also trained as
a psychologist.
Yes.
Counselor.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And somebody who specializes in youth counseling. So they have an office.
Yeah.
Now, those are people who are current with educational thinking and understand how to meet needs. Okay? The model of boarding schools hasn't changed. They were set at a time when there were certain needs that needed to be met. In an earlier time when, as Patrick has clearly put it, schools were few. Those schools were few and far between for most people. So you spend a great deal of time and energy just going to school and coming back. Yes.
Tortures.
Yeah, even if you ran, it was far. Okay? A boarding school.
The distance doesn't change just because you run.
No.
No, it doesn't. But the time you take to go to school does.
Yeah, of course. Yes. But it's still far.
Well, sometimes that justifies a boarding school.
So, a boarding school at that point in time made a lot of sense. And if you look at the structure, you're talking about immediately pre-independence and post. We had intermediate schools, okay? We had primary, then you had intermediate schools, and they were within a locality. The primary school was somewhere not very far, within a village, radius of around, say, 10 kilometers or so. That was not considered far. Now, an intermediate school was now further, probably some 30 kilometers away. Then there was a school you'd find in the region. You know all these schools that people know in the regions? Those are schools where all these people who came from these small places eventually ended up in secondary school. And that is the reason why if they went further and went to Makerere, which is where people went, they tended to know each other. Or if they came from that region, they tended to know each other because you all came from different places, but you collated here. Our population then was small. Now, when you talk about a boarding school and you want to meet the needs of the students, first of all you ask, what is the need of these students?
You know, I like the way you're approaching it, and as a planner, what comes to me naturally is a hierarchy of things. And when you talk about intermediate school and you talk about the immediate primary school, I immediately think about how planning provides for that, for example, because we speak about population sizes and we speak about facilities to a certain number of size of population.
Yes.
So there's territoriality and there is need to reduce distance so that people can get to facilities very easily, and that's very logical, and again it speaks to how we have failed to look at education in a structured way. Planning for education, I know CT is a teacher,
Yes, I am.
to death, but teacher, why don't you ever complain when the system fails us, because the system doesn't see that hierarchical structure? So much so that we begin to think about how do we have high quality day schools in our locale, so that people do not, if we went to a primary school locally and we performed well, why is it so difficult to go to the next level in a 3-kilometer distance from our house? We can. Other communities do it. In fact, any defense around this we can shoot down, because we made all the secondary schools in Nairobi boarding. They were not designed to be boarding schools. They were built for an urban space.
All the public ones.
All the public ones, except a few.
There were few that
which were colonial,
and they were called national schools.
They were called national schools. So we can have exceptions. In fact, we can argue that in the current dispensation, we can have a space for boarding schools. We're not saying that they cannot exist.
Yeah.
But they should be few. The majority of schools, I mean, there was a Queen's High School. It's a beautiful school. What was wrong with Jamhuri High School being a day school? What was wrong with Upper Hill being a day school? Were they not 4-star and 3-star schools? They were
excellent schools, but they were day schools.
They were day schools.
Highway is it?
Highway
was
was a day school. It was a day school.
Okay.
So for a place like the city, it is absolutely sensible to make it a day school. A school must be a day school. We want you to live with your children. We want you to raise your children within the cultural milieu that is your neighborhood. Right? Because education is not about sequestering people somewhere and drilling them to get A's and so on and so forth, and building a totally different culture. And that's what we are saying. So there's a way in which the sector planning has failed, because it's not gone by the hierarchies that it's supposed to.
You know, the thing you say gets to the heart of the matter in this sense. Huh? It's strange, though, because the vast majority of people who are high up in the political hierarchy in this country, the vast majority were former teachers. They were teachers. They taught. What was available at university level for most Africans in those early days was education, or you could study animal husbandry.
Yeah.
What we now call veterinary science. Okay? Yes.
Why do you put it that way? Why do you want to denigrate?
No, I am actually stating.
But then he can't help it.
He can't help it. That's part of his humor.
But that was at Makerere.
Yeah.
The Royal Technical College, which is Nairobi University, did teach engineering and some of these technical subjects. But the point I'm trying to make is this. When people who chose to be educators end up in that space, they are people who take the energy and time to ensure that things work well. But on this I'm actually quite biased, and I may even sound illogical, but allow me to be a little illogical. When the government seeks to increase the number of teachers they are training, and those who are offered a teacher training course are those who have failed to get what they wanted to do in the first place, you already have a problem. Because you're introducing an individual into an environment that requires more than their full attention, and they are there because they are disgruntled to begin with and they didn't get what they wanted. So you already have a problem. Now, these aren't people who are going to give the time and energy to this particular profession as you should. The difference is clear when you look at some of the older teachers who taught people like myself who wanted to teach. They taught very differently. He would testify to what I'm saying. People who wanted to teach, you knew, even as a student, you knew this teacher, there's a word you use in general, it's called passion. They are passionate about their work, they're passionate about their students, they are concerned. And that's why many of them are remembered long after.
They are naturals.
Yes, and the students understood, and the teacher was respected. Now, once that particular ecosystem changed, and you had these people who really wanted to do something else, and then you forced them to teach, Haki, that person is going to teach badly.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it is after that cycle of getting teachers simply because they couldn't get what they wanted, a 10-year cycle occurred. That's when we started having schools being burnt, libraries being burnt, and all these nonsensical things. Because when you teach and you know your students, you know who the troublemakers are. You know the people who are given to the psychopathy. You know the sociopath. You know your students, and you know how to manage them.
But can you imagine the crisis that is in the education sector, for example, today? I mean, you wake up every morning to a new crisis. You wake up every morning to a new crisis. It's either there are no books, it's either there are no facilities, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. It's either that the model has changed so drastically, and nobody has been prepared for that. And so between that and building boarding schools, because our topic is boarding schools, so where do we put the emphasis? Because we have contested resources. We don't have so much money to put in every other place. Why is it that then we give priority to boarding schools when we could have used that money to put up pedagogical facilities, laboratories, better classrooms? Sometimes for day facilities, the number of ablution, the requirements for ablution blocks and water needs are a little lower. So what we put in boarding schools, we could actually put in more day schools, more quality day schools within walking distance, whether it is in urban places or in rural places. And for me, that is one of the reasons that I think we should be rethinking the boarding school and thinking of a high quality day school. There was Kisumu Boys High School. It was always a day school.
It's now a boarding school.
It's now a boarding school. There was Kisumu Day School. It was a day school, very good day school. Everybody passed through there. Why would it become a boarding school? What's the overarching reason that we have to have boarding schools?
So it would have been, let's even go with the Kisumu Boys example. So instead of building dormitories, let's just increase the number of classes, then hire more.
No, even schools.
Let us put, we cannot, you see, there's a carrying capacity, just like a bus. There's a carrying, you don't want to be in a school with 2,000 students, my friend.
No.
It's unmanageable. So I think we cannot concentrate schools in one location. We talked about the boarding school was because there were schools far and in between. Now we need to increase the density and the distance, reduce the distances. It means that we need to provide facilities closer home. Day schools, high quality day schools like Aquinas, like Starehe, like whatever, within proximity, within walking distance.
Yeah, okay.
Paul, have you ever observed with regards to estates that we have in the city of Nairobi or some of the bigger towns which were the headquarters of provinces, planners did this, they did their work. Schools matched the dwelling areas that people lived in.
Absolutely.
You found a primary school, you found a secondary school. Within walking distance of a certain radius. You went to another place, it was the same. Meaning, there was always a school near you. Some it was nearer, but it was not far. And that's why most of us, if you talk to us about primary school, we all walk to school.
Yeah.
We have in planning the term primary neighborhood, which means that's where everything begins.
Yes.
So, and then you have the secondary. And the schools must also be structured around that urban planning,
Thinking, yes.
Thinking and modeling.
So what we are saying is, instead of expanding Kisumu Boys,
Yes.
we build another school.
Yes, new Kisumu Boys.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, because when I was in Nairobi school, the population was about 800, 1,000, if I'm not wrong. Then now in the KCSE results that were released recently, niliona form 4 peke yake wako over 800. So I'm sympathizing with the teachers that I left there, Mr. Maina, Mr. Wawero. I don't know how they're handling that.
They are
number.
listening.
I hope they are. I'm honestly trying to figure out how they handle those numbers.
You know, there's a lazy approach that people develop when it comes to solving serious problems. The problem of education is not a single line, okay? There was a time when the employer of choice in this country was the government. Working for the government was the best thing you could do. In terms, you would get a house, you could get a car, all the things that people look for in the private sector, okay? Teachers were respected, and the things that I'm speaking of, as a teacher, you could get a car loan, all these things that other people get. Something happened and this matrix changed.
What happened?
You see, the countries that we speak of and we admire, if you look at the education policy,
You're talking about Singapore?
No, I'm not talking about Singapore.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about other countries.
Okay.
But you like Singapore, so let's reference Singapore.
No, the president told us to look at Singapore.
Right, he did, didn't
Yes,
he?
yes.
Now, if I were him, I wouldn't look too closely at Singapore, because the other issues within Singapore that his government may have a problem dealing with.
Okay.
Yes, because anyway, what you then find was something simple: the focus on the educator. Countries that made sure that their best are the ones who ended up as educators, meaning to be a teacher you really needed to get the sort of qualifications we know in this country. If you want to be an engineer, you want to be a planner, you want to be a doctor, those ones, that should have been the requirement for teachers. So
And it should be. It should remain there.
Yes.
Because you are preparing people. You are building the civil service. You're building the human resource of the country.
Of the country.
So you need the best person to prepare you in that space.
That resource, my friend, and the responsibility is huge. So you actually need your very best. And even the process of training the teachers, you don't just...
It's rigorous.
It's rigorous. You get your degree, you get your education, then you get something else. By the time you enter classroom, Chief, you are prepared, but they are also remunerated well.
That's where the problem lies.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's where
they've gotten the priorities right. Here, it's inversed.
So a teacher is not paid any less in Scandinavia or in Japan because he's a teacher.
No.
I think there's a living wage that everybody must, sort of level out at, and then there are extras, and then there are other packs, that insurance and so on and so forth, that remove teachers out of these vulnerabilities. And that's an important thing to do.
So now, how then do we get back to that? Because if my beloved Nairobi school has all these thousands, or maybe there are over 1,000 by now for sure. If we're having all this, then now it has taken me to figure out the kind of resources I left there, the playing fields. Hizo vitu sasa ziko constrained.
Absolutely.
And I don't think now people are getting quality education, quality sports, and so on and so forth.
Yes, that's a second problem, CT, if you allow me. That is a second problem, because we have sacred sites. Those schools you're talking about, there's Lenana, there's Nairobi School, there's Alliance High School, there is
Lance Girls High School,
Lance Girls High School, there is Highlands, Moi Girls, and Limuru. So everybody who goes to school in Kenya, every kid in primary school in Kenya sees those beacons. They don't see any other beacons. Yet, those were colonial things. So what happened to us? We've been here for how long? Since 1964.
We are now 62 years.
So why don't we have 62 new national schools if we were doing just one every year for 62 years? Why shouldn't we have a national school per county? That speaks to the lack of foresight in planning, forward planning, and so on and so forth. But again, you can have a national school, then you must do something called branding, because if you're going to come from Nairobi Primary School and you have to go to Sawagongo, then you must find some branding that can allow people. And I say this in all seriousness, because I mean there are universities with names that actually discourage people. But
you're actually very right.
So we had this conversation with one person in the higher education sector, and he thought that we were just fooling around, and we said to him, the problem with you people in high offices is you don't listen to other perspectives.
You don't have a culture of listening.
You don't have a culture of listening, because you
have a culture of telling people where to get off.
You tell people off.
Yes.
You're always in the habit of telling people off because you're the big honcho. You say, but look, we're now complaining about national schools which cannot attract kids.
Yeah.
It's all to do with branding. Yes. Muga.
No, I'm laughing. I'm thinking of a kid brought up in Nairobi.
Yes.
Then you're being taken to Sagongo. God Almighty. It is actually a very good school. Let me just get this thing right.
With all the equipment.
It is a really, really good school.
And it has always been.
But the culture shock guy.
Unafika hapo unaambia Professor Bitoko's answering questions in Parliament, I think it was yesterday, and part of the conversation was around exactly what you've said, these national schools, and then now we are lacking capacity in other schools because people do not want those other schools.
Yes.
Everyone is insisting on going to now the C1 schools like in Alliance and Nairobi and Lenana, and unfortunately now those capacities are overwhelmed. But you've asked a very good question. Since 1964, it's been over 60 years later. And I like doing this thing that City always disagrees with. Me, I always look for someone to blame. Who should be blamed? Because we someone has got to someone needs to take responsibility. Is it because you see government is now kuna watu wengi wanaingia kitoka kwa serikali, but someone has got to take responsibility. Who is it? Who are we blaming for this?
No, I think we've reached a point in time. I used to be very radical in my approach to things, but today I am more inclined towards public policy dialogue, just persuading people to see things differently, because we've come a long way. We've made many mistakes, and people make mistakes, and they have to learn from the mistakes they make. And if anybody cares, anybody is listening from the Ministry of Education, we must do things differently. Sometimes if you want people to hear you, you may need to speak to them softly and also implore them to do their work better so that the outcomes can be better. And so all these beautiful schools with beautiful infrastructure, we may want to persuade them to look for good names for them so that parents are encouraged to take their kids to those schools. For example, if Sagongo is a national school, we may want to say, let us call it Siaya County School. Okay? It's not a bad name. I mean, they say, it's a name, it's a county name.
Pride to the county, yes.
Yeah, it brings pride to the county. So people want to go to Siaya County School, but they may not want to go to Onjiko High School, But Onjiko High School has very good facilities.
You've been to these places, eh?
Yes,
I have. I speak from reality.
And those are serious schools that very serious people went to.
Yes,
because if you came from that Nyando area, Onjiko is where you
come from.
The intermediate I'm speaking about was Onjiko. Then you went to Maseno.
Yes,
if you excelled.
But you see, Maseno is actually a good name, and it's a name that when you're told you're going to Maseno, you'll be like, okay, it's a good place to go to.
No, it has history.
That's the whole point. These many of the schools we speak of are former missionary schools, right? And they have a name because they were the places that people could access education in those early days. And people who later made something of their lives and were known.
Yes.
So with the fame of the individuals comes the fame of the school.
Absolutely.
Yes, because you say so and so went to this school. Some people take it a bit far, but there it is.
Again, who is to blame? And you've said that we approach it from a policy perspective. Okay, clearly policy is made at government level. So you've said that also it's difficult to have conversations with some of these folks because they don't listen. So what will happen? Will 62 years again pass by, and then we have this or rather people in that time will have this very conversation.
Yes, but again, conversations around education are never held around the subject that we're discussing today. They will be about books, they will be about CBC, they are seldom ever around infrastructure and so on and so forth. And looking back to devolution, there are issues and problems, challenges that have to do with the way devolution structured things. In the quest to do something about schools in a devolved system, there were arguments about whether schools should be in the national government or should be in the counties, and people who had their own interests ensured that most school issues remain at the national government. But there is a sense in which there should have been a concurrency of functions between county and national, not just to the level that counties only do CBA or whatever, care. The infrastructure bit could, to a large extent, have been taken care of by counties and communities. And so the policy dialogue that we need to be looking at is looking at the rudimentary infrastructure today in schools. If you do an audit of school infrastructure today in Kenya, you'll be embarrassed to be a Kenyan, because they're still mud-walled schools. There are still schools without ablution facilities.
There are schools without doors or even windows.
There are schools without doors or windows, or even roofs. There are schools 64 years, since 1964 today, more than 60 years. We still have schools in such conditions. Who can we blame? It's systemic. It's systemic. And it calls for...
Actually, if you want to take on this topic of blame, there's a gentleman called Abdullah Alas.
Yes.
Abdullah Alas said something some years ago when I first met him. That thing has stuck with me. And he said, according to him, and I agree with him, he said, our problem is the thinkers are ignored. The people who actually take the time to understand, think through issues are ignored. When they say, it's not that we don't have them. No, we think we don't have them, but we actually have them, but they're ignored. The people whose voices are heard are the non-thinkers.
Yeah.
Because a country has a plan. If you're talking about economic development, there's a plan. If you talk about the education sector, there's a plan. This is where the country wishes to go to, and the human resource needs to be planned for and need to be prepared in this way. This is what we need for the schools. This is what we need for primary. This is what we need for ECD. There has to be a master plan for all these things, because if you're going in a certain direction, you must have the human resource to take you there.
Absolutely. You speak to the word master plan, you need an education master plan.
Yes.
You cannot have an education plan that is fluid. You don't know whether next year somebody will not go to another place and come back with a CBL model or a CBT model. You can never be sure. It's always in flux. That is problematic. So speaking to an education master plan, which is geared towards, there has to be a reason why we have education. At the end of this education, what are the outputs and what are the outcomes desired? What futures are we speaking to? Seldom is this topic ever given that depth of thinking. Seldom. It's politicized highly.
Yes.
It is for immediate impact and so on and so forth. It is about distribution of books or what, and it's about CDF. Why would members of parliament be building schools? Ask me another question. Why would members of parliament, did you hear me?
Yes.
Members of what?
Parliament.
Why are they doing executive work? Building schools?
Okay.
There has to be an authority in a country like this that builds school development infrastructure.
Yeah, because
authority.
That's how you'll find a school in this constituency is very different from...
Of course, there are no standards anymore. Yet Public Works does actually have standards for schools.
Actually,
it does.
There are laid down processes and procedures as to what a school should be like. Size of a classroom, the number of students in that classroom. Okay, all these things. When I asked the question of, do you see, for instance, in a town, a city like Nairobi, where the schools are situated, every area that has a name has a school.
Have you been to Harambee? Do you know a place called Harambee in Buruburu? There's a small estate, very nice.
Yeah.
You know, these days people don't see those kind of estates because they see 20-story buildings.
Maybe, yeah.
If you go to Harambee Primary School, you see what a modern primary school in Kenya should be like. And that school was built 50 years ago. Harambee Primary School,
Yeah.
beautiful public school. Then you come and see the ones that are being put up by members of parliament. It's a misnomer that members of parliament should be building schools, because they will not
Do you know
build to the
do you know
standards.
where it
It's
is?
none of their business.
Do you know where the rains are beating us? Okay. There were government schools. They always were. In central Kenya, they woke up and realized this education these guys are giving us don't work for us. So they started independent schools. Then there were church-based schools that certain faiths and the people who congregated around that faith started putting up. Now, what would happen over time is that the government would take over these schools. So you'd find the school is referred to, say, like an assisted school. Their terminology. Okay? There was a PTA school, meaning the parents teach, the locality are the ones who put
Now
up the
you're in
school.
the history, because the word assisted, government assisted schools.
Yes.
Those were the terminology.
Yes. So eventually the government would take over, and even if it was a faith-based school, the standards were the same. It's not as though you had your faith-based standards. No. Faith ni yako, lakini school ni ya serikali. Okay? Where the problem now began, the government stopped taking that keen interest in doing what they're supposed to do.
So that's when
I
the
think
rain.
that's the crux of the matter.
They stopped.
Yeah.
They actually stopped.
Yeah.
Minimal effort. You wouldn't hear of the government putting up new schools.
Yes, but when members of parliament are doing the work of the executive, don't you think that we have a very serious problem?
We do. The problem began before even the CDF issues.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I personally like the CDF, but that's not the story for now. I personally like the CDF.
Yeah.
Okay? It's a lovely crutch. You see, the thing is this. If you look at what it is that the NMS did in Nairobi, forget the politics around it. What was reported as what Dr. Oluga did with reference to hospitals. It was the first time in a very long time that one heard of hospitals being built. First time in a very, very long time. Whether they followed a plan that had been there, I don't know. But the hospitals that were built, and you can actually go and see them. Now, there are roles that the national government is supposed to perform and fulfill. School is one of them.
It's a national government function.
It's a responsibility. With a growing population, which they know full well, they have data to tell them at which rate we're growing. All these things, whether it's health facilities, whether it is schools, we are supposed to build them, we being the government, to meet the needs of these populations. Okay?
Yes.
Not to suddenly have 80 students in a class which is meant for 40. Haki, very little learning is going to
Unasema
take.
80. Kuna pahali tuliambiwa hapa tu 200.
You know that one? It's the desks zinashikana, and you have to walk over desks to go and
To get to your seats.
It's now, if schools were built, or you look for schools which had a compound, and suddenly you cut it into half, a secondary school is built on one side, and I'm thinking that compound was meant for the expansion of that school.
So that's problematic, because schools have standards for land use, and schools in planning, schools are separated because secondary schools have their own land requirements.
Yes.
Primary schools have their own land requirements. Universities require
ECD
between
has their
50
own needs for
and
the
100
land, yes.
acres. ECDs have their own. So when I talk to the absence of a structured approach in education planning, we must have new sites for those schools. Even if we must have boarding schools, say one extra county boarding school, that's okay. Let's have it in a plan, okay? And say we shall have national schools, which will be boarding schools. We shall have extra county schools, only so many, which will be boarding schools. But we shall have an infrastructure standard to die for.
Yeah.
And we shall build them. If today we are not prepared, I think we should begin to think about the possibility of a school construction authority, because we need to standardize things. Otherwise, we will have all these mongrels. Everybody
And the
builds
disparity will
the way
continue
they- and the
increasing.
disparity will continue. And you will have schools without national schools with pit latrines. You think I exaggerate?
No.
Even in Nairobi, schools in Nairobi have pit latrines.
Yeah.
Now, what does that speak to in terms of boarding schools? Do we have safe facilities for kids in boarding schools? No, we don't. So we need also to have a system of auditing and monitoring all these things. There has to be a department that is charged with monitoring and inspecting and maintenance and so on and so forth, because that's the level. We are in the 21st century, and these are not far-fetched notions, you know. There are things that the ministry must begin to concern itself with, because otherwise then boarding schools are traps. Boarding schools are dangerous for kids at the moment. They are not equipped to house 2,000 kids. That's a disaster in the waiting.
I remember last year there's a school that went on strike, and one of the reasons actually they went on strike is because they lacked enough toilets, and the ones that were available were actually the pit latrines, and they were saying, Buana, this is unsustainable. But now I'm still on the issue of master plan, and we from what I'm hearing is like there was a master plan at one point, but it's just gathering dust somewhere. Because if I look at, again, I went to Nairobi school. So if I look at Nairobi school, then I have, of course, visited other schools like Lenana, Mary Hill, and so on and so forth. And I could tell there was some kind of plan when they came up with these particular spaces, these particular schools. Well, they were built by the colonialists, and then the government took over. But the point is, there was a plan. So is it that, again, someone just ignored that plan, or that plan is no longer viable in 2026?
Actually, it is what superseded what or which. Populism in politics superseded everything else.
That's why we have members of parliament building schools.
Yes.
Let me repeat again.
Yes.
Populism in politics superseded everything.
It's a very fundamental point you make, CT. Populism. Schools, education facilities, preparing futures, human resource are not things that should be left to populism. They should be left purely to strategy and to plan. And you know, you said it so easily that somebody might underestimate its importance. When we start building schools on the basis of popularity, then we miss the point completely. We should build schools for a purpose, not so that we can have our legacy projects and so on and so forth. Once schools are politicized, once facilities of such importance and magnitude are politicized, then we are in a very bad place. Then we will actually perpetuate mediocrity, and that is what has happened.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at how settlement schemes are planned, I'm giving this as an example because I live in a settlement scheme myself. You will find that spaces for all these things are always provided. So you'll find schools within, as I said, a certain radius. Moroni township to Tamu is some 5 or 6 kilometers. But in between those 4 or so kilometers, there are, I think, 3 primary schools. Beginning with Moroni, somewhere in between there's a place called Tonde Primary School. So meaning, it's as people can, within that 4 kilometer radius, very many people can access those schools very easily.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then there are the secondary schools that then follow.
There is a ratio.
Yes.
There is a ratio.
Yes.
Primary schools to secondary schools.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Now, the plans exist. When I talk about the populism of politics, I'm talking about expediency, where, and this is where the thinkers come in, or the lack of thinkers, or the absence of paying heed to what thinkers have. We are not talking about something that is extremely important to do. No, we are not. We are not talking about things that require some esoteric knowledge. No. It's actually fairly simple. There is a need, there is a population, and there's the role of the national government and how this need can be met. It's really not that complicated. But why politics comes in is because favoritism follows soon after. And that's where you have discussions and things like siasa mbaya, maisha mbaya. And siasa mbaya meant you're questioning the government. How can that possibly be siasa mbaya? That's siasa mzuri. Because when you hold leaders to account, that's when they do what they're supposed to do.
I just love what you said, because the point about government is supposed to be neutral. Government is not supposed to see people in terms of tribes or those who don't pay tax or those who vote or so on. So government sees populations, government sees resources, government sees things at a very global level. And therefore, when it sees 2,500 people, it thinks there has to be a school. Right? When it sees 5,000 people, then it sees a magnitude of facilities that are required in a space.
Yeah.
Government is supposed to be a programmed robot. Okay? It knows that that there is something required for 2,500 people, and there's a set of things that it must do. That's government. It's not supposed to be emotional. Government can't be emotional. How is it possible that government can be emotional? Okay? So I hear what he's saying, and we need to recalibrate ourselves and say, look, you cannot sell schools as politics. You cannot sell medical facilities as politics. You have an obligation to supply them. Okay? As government. And you derive your legitimacy by doing things that are required in your national plan. And you do have such a national plan in which you have said you're going to do these things. So doing them does not come from being exhorted to do what you're supposed to do. Okay? And I think that explains some of the problems we have with the imbalances in how schools are supplied, which ones become national schools, which ones get funding and which ones don't get funding. And that creates a lot of imbalances in the country. And I think that's undesirable.
You know, Africa is not the only place that we are having this population growth. It's obviously happening in other parts of the world, but why is it that we usually see these problems very prevalent this side of the globe?
Why? What sort of people are we, really? Because that is the question that we ask. Because for this to happen in this time and age, and with the human resource that we have, equipped, knowledgeable, when I ask what people are we, we're not necessarily an educated people. What is it that makes us who we are? Are we really cognizant of what it is that is our responsibility so long as we're alive on this planet and in this space, and what it is we need to do for posterity? Because if you look at the thinking, and again our politics comes in, it is short-sighted.
Because whenever I read headlines about education, and especially the ones that are negative, I only see them on this continent. Elsewhere, I just see progressive stuff happening.
No, there are problems there as well.
But ni venye si kama za hapa. Zetu bana ati sasa tunashindwa tu kutengeneza choo.
Zetu ni nyingi.
You know
boarding schools.
We are 50 years old. When I was doing Konza, some people said, "Oh, you're just doing a project that is dead. When is it going to come off stream?" and so on and so forth. Then in my indignation, I would ask them, have you ever gone back to your secondary school where you studied? Where you studied. And you keep on referring to Nairobi School. And
yes.
How many new buildings have been put up at Nairobi School in the last 50 years?
In the last 50 years?
Yes.
Wow. Maybe one or two more dormitories?
Absolutely. That's who we are. We don't build. We don't improve. We don't make. We don't create new things. We only glorify the colonial structure. Okay. Even in cities, we only want to go and build things in Kilimani, which is an existing place here, or whatever. This is the place we are.
Yes.
But why don't we create new Kilimani?
Why don't we create new cities?
Why don't we create new cities? Why don't we create new schools? Brand new. Schools, branded schools. What are the newest branded schools in Kenya? The likes of Alliance. Which ones? Let's count 10 of them.
Most of the schools that are branded are private. If you look at schools
that are public schools,
private, of course, you will count several, but public, sorry.
But that's what I'm trying to say. If all I can look at is the private, it means there is none that I can speak of in the public sector. I'm sure they exist, but I don't know them.
They do. There are some very beautiful schools in Nyanza I've seen, and I have used them to incite people in my community to do that. There is a school, it's not Kanga, there is a school in South Nyanza called Something Girls. it's done very beautiful infrastructure. They probably just need branding. But that school was founded in 1975, and it has done marvelous things in terms of infrastructure. And you can see that even in this gloomy space, I think there are examples of people who've done a marvelous job trying to improve school infrastructure, all odds notwithstanding. And that means that it is possible for people to deliberately go out there, to create schools that are deserving of the populations that for which they are leaders.
Patrick, thank you so much. Here is where we come to a stop as far as today's conversation is concerned. But like I told you, no, ofisi yako tutafungua tu hapa hivi. Then let's continue with this one. I will stop using blueprint now. Going forward, I'm going to talk about master plan.
Master plan.
I think that's a better way to look at things. Karibu tena sana. See you next time.